Welcome back to the channel, everybody, for another edition of the Diamond Star Stories featuring the players and cards from the 1934 to 1936 Diamond Star set. Today is none other than card number 45, outfielder from the Detroit Tigers, JoJo White. JoJo, whose full name is Joyner Clifford White, got the name JoJo when people were trying to pronounce his name real quickly, and it quickly got shortened to JoJo when he was playing amateur ball and Little League ball during his childhood and his late adolescence. He was born in Red Oak, Georgia in 1909 and quickly became very popular within his high school team and the local teams, and was getting a lot of notoriety as maybe like the next guy coming from Georgia that was going to be the next superstar, similar to like Ty Cobb. And then he obviously became a Detroit Tiger, which obviously there's a close link there as well, given that Cobb came from Georgia himself and also played for Detroit. But JoJo, he was scouted out and was signed into minor league baseball in the late 20s, I believe in 1928, and where he kind of bounced around a lot of leagues on both the Eastern and Midwest before he got eventually signed and brought on to the Detroit Tigers, where he spent the majority of his career. In fact, even being able to become a regular player by 1934, which was really cool because that was the year they reached the World Series, in which he was a runner-up that season and later won the World Series the following year in 1935. During his time with the Tigers, he was roommates with Hank Greenberg. So sometimes there was, when you look at some of the readings from Hank Greenberg and his experience, sometimes was this sort of cultural clash between the South and obviously in the North, in the ways they kind of talked and learned about things and their cultures separately. But I guess it was always very friendly in the way they kind of had these conversations. And I think Greenberg always thought that he was genuinely a good guy that was willing to kind of learn about things, even though obviously their worldviews were very different during their times. So he spent most of his time with the Tigers and then got moved on in 1938 after he became kind of mad that he lost his starting position at that time to an up-and-coming rookie at that time. And so he, I guess, allegedly destroyed the straw hat of his manager, and his manager later found out that he was the one that did it and quickly moved him on to the Pacific Coast League in Sacramento in 1938. Now, whether or not I know that story is true or not, I have no way of knowing for sure, but this is just kind of part of his bio. But he kind of made a name for himself while playing in the Pacific Coast League for several years, including winning a couple batting titles during his time there. So much and so that he enjoyed it, that he was able to come back after the rest of his playing career. But he did get brought back into the major leagues after a couple years in the Pacific Coast League. I believe he was brought back in like 1941 or something like that. At the advent of World War II, when they needed to be able to fill out rosters, they started scouting, obviously, around the country to see who was available and who had major league experience, and JoJo fit the bill. So he was brought back to the major leagues and then kind of spent some time with the A's and then later with the Reds before he kind of wrapped up things in 44, but he was not done playing yet. His best season as a major leaguer was actually in 34. His WAR was 2.8, had a .313 average and stole 28 bases. But he spent a lot more time in the Pacific Coast League, as I mentioned, and he actually returned to the Pacific Coast League in 45 and played there all the way through 49, and actually was a player manager for much of the last few years of his career there. He spent time with the Hollywood Stars, he spent time in Seattle and also in Sacramento, where he had his best seasons as a major leaguer, was within the Pacific Coast League. By the time he retired, he didn't move far away from baseball. He got into scouting. So he was able to be a scout for Cleveland for many years, also with Detroit as well. At this time, the Kansas City A's, the Milwaukee Braves, and later Atlanta Braves. He stayed with them for many years and kind of wrapped things up with the Royals. So he kind of stayed, obviously, connected with baseball for much of his life until he kind of retired. But he did get involved with some coaching during some of that time too, when he was not involved with scouting. And so he was part of like this famous sort of trade of managers in 1960. So Joe Gordon was traded for Jimmy Dykes during the 1960 season. They were both managers at the time. And JoJo was working tightly with Joe Gordon at the time as part of his coaching staff. But after Joe Gordon was traded, JoJo was called upon by Cleveland to be able to manage this one game until they had Jimmy Dykes come over and take over the team in 60 as part of that exchange. So he was there, he coached, he won the game, and he won his only major league game as a manager, so his winning percentage is 1,000. So how many managers can say that? But he returned to coaching thereafter on Joe Gordon's staff when Joe went over to, I believe, the A's at that time, if I'm not mistaken. But that's kind of wrapped things up before he got into scouting. He passed on in 1986, but he did live long enough to see himself become a member of the Georgia Sports Hall of Fame in 1977. He was survived by a daughter and a son, and most famously, his son actually did play in the majors as well. He was part of the Houston Colt 45s for a couple seasons. He was just sort of a bench player during that time, but he was part of that inaugural franchise for Houston that later became the Astros and later moved into the American League that we know him today, and are just a powerhouse team in the American League. But he was part of that early team back in the 60s. So that is JoJo, otherwise known as Joyner White, outfielder for the Detroit Tigers, card number 45 from the Diamond Star set. I'll show you the back real quickly before I sign out for the day. And so I will see you again next month with another feature in this series. I'll have to kind of figure out which card I'm going to do. Hope to be able to pick a few up later this month at the National. So maybe it'll be one of my new ones. It potentially could be one that's still in my case right now, which you'll get a chance to see very soon, because I do plan to do a card room tour, which does have a special spot for this set. So until next time, take care.